Carol Parker, and I am a part of the United Methodist Women, and we make the apple pies every year. This year, due to the COVID issues, we're not going to be able to make pies, so we thought we'd send you a virtual pie. We are going to show you today how to make your own pie so that you won't miss out on pies altogether this year. The first thing we do is we fix our apples, and we get together a crew that peels the apples. The crew uses an apple peeler. Sometimes it works well on the apples, sometimes the apples are odd shaped and it doesn't work so well. So we're going to give this one a try and see if it's going to work for us. We just never know. We usually have a group of gentlemen that peel our apples for us, and sometimes we get the whole apple into the pie and sometimes they take a little snack off the apple. So you never know just how much of our apple we're going to get. I'm looking for my knife. Right here. Okay. So when we get it peeled like that, we end up taking off the odd ends and cutting it into chunks into a bath of salt water. Now the salt water is there because number one, it keeps your apples from turning brown, and number two, it just adds to the flavor of the apples. Now a lot of people ask us what kind of apples we use, and we tend to use Jonathan apples. They're a sweet but yet tart apple, and kind of have a little bit of acidic value to them, and they hold up well when you bake them. And so then we just take our apple and we chunk it up into our water, and we have a whole bunch. Now, I've had some of these done before, and what I'm going to do now is I'm going to drain them, and while they're draining, then we can make our pie crust. Now it just makes a difference on what the size of your apples, how many apples to get. A lot of people want to know, do I get 6 apples? Do I get 10 apples? Really what you're going to need is 5 to 6 cups of apples after they're peeled. So I just peeled 10 apples to give you an idea. And I'm not quite sure how that's going to measure out. We're going to find out when we get to that part of it. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to make the pie crust. And the pie crust we usually make 2 or 3 days ahead of time, as far as we cut the sugar, not the sugar, we don't put sugar in our pie crust. We cut the flour and the Crisco and the salt together. And then we put it in the refrigerator. We can roll it out. Then the following, 2, 3 days, sometimes 2 or 3 weeks later, it'll keep in the refrigerator for a long time. The secret pie crust recipe is on the back of the Crisco can. So you all have had access to this pie crust recipe for years. It's not always on the back of the can, but it is most of the time. And it basically just reads out as to 2 cups of flour. We always use gold medal flour. It seems to work well with the Crisco. And we always use Crisco simply because it's a good quality shortening. Then you're going to put a teaspoon of salt and 3/4 cup of chilled vegetable shortening, which is Crisco. And then we're going to add ice water to it. Now I've already cut some of this together for you. But basically what you want to do is you want to use a pastry blender, and you want to cut it together until it is about pea size. Do not overcut, because when you overcut it, it starts getting tough. And it's going to look, I don't know if you can see on the camera or not, but it's going to look flaky and just really soft. It's not going to be gooey and gummy yet because we're going to add our ice water to it. So I'm going to get some water, and I have yet to measure the water that I need to put in there. I usually just pour because it makes it, you're going to work it together until it gets to be a dough ball basically. I'm going to have to clean off my counter. So we're going to make our pie. Now, when we're making the pie dough, you blend it together to where it actually just makes a ball of dough. You don't want it to be too dry, because when you roll it out, it's going to crack. And if you get it too wet, then it sticks to your rolling pin. So there is that fine line. Now, we use our money that we get from making pies to support organizations that involve mostly women and children. And so you will find that many of our organizations that we give to deal with women and children. We give to Ambassadors for Children, we give to Harmony House. We also give internationally, we give to UMCOR, We give to some of our state and local. We support a prison ministry, so that involves women who are in prison and the ability to visit with their children. So we try to stay with that theme. We made about 1,200 pies last year at $10 a pie. That gives you an idea how much we receive in order to support these organizations. And this year, we're just not able to make our pies. And so we are hoping that those of you who have been able to support us by coming and helping us make the pies, that you give yourself a break this year, but you still help support us financially. That would mean so much to not only us, but to the organizations that we're helping out, because these organizations are also struggling this year because they're not having enough funds. So kind of a twofold here. You're going to get to make a virtual pie, and you're going to get to help other people. Now when we make our pie, we have our pastry cloth that someone has so kindly drawn a circle on, because when you roll out your pie dough, you want it to come out in a circle. I've had so many people who have been so kind to offer to roll pie dough, and they start rolling their pie dough, and it looks more like the shape of Texas than a circle. So, you know, it's something that it's a kind of a learned art. But if you get enough water in your pastry, you can always put enough flour on and it will come out nice and round and smooth. So when you roll out your pie crust, roll just little bits at a time, and don't roll clear to the edge. I hate to say don't on things, but if you roll it clear to the edge and run it out smooth, then it's going to be way too skinny. Okay, there we go. We've got a nice round shape for our pie. Okay, once you get your circle made with your pie dough, then you're just going to fold it in half and lift it into your pie tin. Now if your pie dough is really tender, you got to be very careful or it's going to tear on you. And then we're going to flip this over. And it didn't flip out so well this time. So we've got it into our pie tin now. The next step is to make your filling, and I've already done that. When we make the filling at church, we use like 16 pounds of sugar, and we make a batch for about 40 pies at a time. So what I have here is enough for one pie, which is 3/4 cup of sugar, 3 tablespoons of flour, and 3/4 teaspoon of cinnamon. And I put it in this bowl and I stirred it with a fork, but then I put the lid on it and kind of shook it around so that it stirred up even more. And that's what you have to make sure is you get that evenly stirred up. Now what we're going to do is we're going to do this the church way. This is not the way I do it at home all the time, but we're going to do it the church way. Is we take this mixture and we sprinkle about 1/3 of it in the bottom of the pie tin. And then we get our apples, and I've got to measure out our apples. When we measure our apples, we have a 4-cup measuring cup here, and it calls for 5 to 6, which means basically you put this level full. Make sure your apples are well drained, because if they aren't, your pie is going to get watery. And I've made enough apples here for 2 pies. Uh-oh, I don't know how to do that. So then we're going to just layer our apples. We're going to put a layer of apples. We're going to spread them out. And sometimes you get a little bit of peeling in there. That's okay. We're going to add a little more sugar. And then we're going to put another layer of apples. Now you'll have to judge with your pie tin. This is a 9-inch pie tin, and it's a deep dish. Got another. But your apples will settle. So you want it nice and rounded. And that's what a Wesley pie is. It's always a pretty full pie. Once in a while we get one that's not quite as full as the others because it ends up with a hole in it or it's settled down. Okay, so we're halfway there. We got the pie put together for that part, but we have to put butter on top. I use margarine. We've always used margarine. The recipe calls for 2 tablespoons of margarine, and we just kind of lay it around here. And now we're ready to roll our top crust. I'm going to move this out of the way a little bit. I will say with the cinnamon that we use, we've always used McCormick cinnamon because McCormick cinnamon is what our original recipe came with, and we have learned that different cinnamon has different strength. So, you know, if you want it to taste close to the pie that you get from church, I would suggest you use the cinnamon that has about the same strength as McCormick, if not that brand. I'm not getting endorsements from anyone. It's just what we've always ended up using. I've always told the people who roll the pie dough that you can't ever put too much flour to it. And we're going to put this over across on top of that pie. So there's 2 ways to pick up your pie crust. The first time I folded it in half. This time I rolled it on my rolling pin. And it just flips over like that. Pop it. Now, this is the part that I always have somebody else do, because when you do the edges of your pie crust, you're going to want to seal them so it doesn't bake over, because that's part of what makes your pie leak into your oven when you bake it, is if you don't have your edges sealed real well. So I'm going to trim this out, and when I trim it out, I trim about 1 inch away from the edge. And if you'll notice, I don't know if you can tell or not, but I have my hand underneath and I'm running with scissors along my joint, my knuckle there. So I always get about the same distance from the pie. You can take this excess crust and roll it out, put a little cinnamon sugar on it and bake it in the oven, and it makes good little crispies that you or the children or the husband or whoever's around might enjoy. But then you take this and you roll it under, and you're going to tuck it. And if you'll notice, when I put the apples in, I made sure they were away from the edge of the pie pan, so that we've got some working room here for your edge. I will say that over the years, I have appreciated the help so much of all of the people who have come and helped us make pies, because you could probably guess that there's been 100 people each year come into that kitchen at church and make pie. So you would be surprised how many of those people have never made a pie before in their lives. They come in and they help. They'll either peel the apples, or they will do measuring of the sugar or something like that. So next year, hopefully you all can come and help us again. But right now, we're going to crimp the edges. And some people take a pinch and twist, and that's probably what you'll see on most of them. I do a thumb and 2-finger print, which is much faster for me. I just mash it down, and it seals it that way. And I've always been backwards to what I do this, but as it comes around, you can see what it looks like. Okay, one last step. When you make your pie, you're going to want to cut vents in the top. And some people are very decorative and cut pretty little things in. I usually just go through and put little slashes in, and the most important thing is that those vents go all the way through so that when it bakes, it can bubble up through that vent. So here's the finished pie out of the oven, freshly baked, and you can see what your pie should look like. Now I have put just a little bit of sugar on top of it after we finish baking it, and you bake it at 400 degrees for about an hour to an hour and 10 minutes, and it should be fine. The one thing that you can do, if you bake your pie fresh, closer to an hour. If you decide to put it in a gallon Ziploc bag and stick it in your freezer, it's more like an hour and 10 minutes. So thank you so much for taking time to watch this, and we really would appreciate your help this year. Those of you that buy pies, those of you who come and help us make the pies, this year we just needed some financial support. So whatever you can do to help us out would be greatly appreciated, and I know the organizations that we support will appreciate it also. Thank you.